Honeycomb, or perhaps you know it as Cinder Toffee. This is the stuff that you can buy and eat, but also in this country, in UK, you get crunchy bars. Well, probably get them everywhere else in the world, but they come from UK, crunchy bars. And they're basically this Cinder Toffee, this honeycomb coated in chocolate. Apparently you also get them in Australia where they're called violet crumbles. But we're going to make some. You're going to need to prepare a tray to put it in. Now you can grease a tray, but I'm not so sure I fancy that with this Cinder Toffee. So I've lined a tray with some greaseproof paper. Okay, and the idea being we're obviously going to create this almost like a caramel. Pour that in there and then just leave it to set. But you will need a deep saucepan because we need to get this thing to foam up. And so although it may not look like there's an awful lot in there, when we add the magic ingredient, which is 2 teaspoons of bicarb of soda, it's going to froth up. So I've already told you I want 2 teaspoons of bicarb. I've got 1.5 cups. This comes from an old Australian recipe and it's all in cups, so I still didn't see the point of converting it. 1.5 cups of caster sugar, 1/3 cup of water. We're going to be adding 1/3 cup of honey, 1/3 cup of golden syrup, and that's it. You're going to need a wooden spoon and a thermometer. Now, I've got a sugar thermometer. My only concern is I'm not sure I'm going to have an awful lot in there that will be able to read it. So I've also got a infrared one. Because obviously it's quite critical we get the temperature right. So that's what we're going to need. So let's put it all together. So I'll put my sugar in there. Whoops, my water in there. And then, like I say, we want to measure out 1/3 cup of honey. This is actually fresh pot of honey I was given by a friend of the wife. We've got her own hive, got her own hive, that doesn't sound right. And she's producing tons and tons of honey from it. So she's given me some jars, so I might be doing some honey things. So I'm just going to sort of try and do this so I don't go make a mess, and then we'll put the golden syrup in. Essentially what was in that jar was 1/3 cup. It might be a fraction over, but ain't gonna. So we put all this into this saucepan. So the only other ingredient which we don't add at this stage is bicarb. Now there are some recipes that utilise vinegar alongside the bicarb, obviously to create, you know, that reaction to generate carbon dioxide. However, did that without making too much sticky mess. However, we're just going to add the bicarb to it as it is, and the heat will thermally decompose. Ooh, getting posh again. Bit of silence. It will thermally decompose the bicarb and release CO2 that way. So I'm just giving that a bit of a mix together. So I'll put the heat on low, and we're just going to gently warm this up until basically it boils, which should be about 132 Celsius centigrade. Like I said, this thermometer isn't really going to register because I don't know if you can see there's not an awful lot in there. So I'm going to have to rely on the gun. When we get it to 132, we need to basically maintain it at 132 for 15 minutes. So obviously we're trying to cook it and caramelise it, but we don't want to go too far. I mean, you can sort of get it darker if you want, but that's what we're working on. So this is gradually getting more and more liquid, so we just keep an eye on it. So I said at the beginning, honeycomb, cinder toffee. It goes by a variety of names. Another name, which I believe originates down in Cornwall, is hokey pokey. It's also known as hokey pokey in other parts of the world. In fact, it's known as Cinder Toffee and Honeycomb Toffee and Honeycomb in various parts of the world. However, there are some odd ones. So, old-fashioned puff in Massachusetts, and along the same puff theme, puff candy in Scotland. Now, I can understand that a bit because it's sort of puffy, spongy, and I suppose that's where the Massachusetts ones come from. It's just when you talk about puff, some people might put a different connotation on it. Sponge toffee in Canada, because like I said, it resembles a sponge. Japan have a name for it. However, they often add raw egg whites in with the bicarb, and so then when it fluffs up, it forms like a dome. I believe it's popular in fairs and things like that. Dalgona in Korea. It was a very popular snack, street snack in the 70s and 80s, apparently in Korea. They still eat it. It's classed as like a retro food. I suppose we would say that the same in this country as well. Now in New Zealand, it's known as hokey pokey, and they make a classic ice cream, apparently, known as hokey pokey ice cream. It's just plain vanilla ice cream with little lumps of this honeycomb in it. They also add it to biscuits, known as hokey pokey biscuits. And in Taiwan, peng tang meaning swollen sugar, because I suppose it does swell up when you foam it up. So I'm just going to get this up to temperature, and then like I say, we're just going to keep it boiling at that temperature, 132 Celsius, for 15 minutes. Should add another little word of warning while I think about it, while I'm waiting for this come temperature. Don't try and taste it. We're basically making sort of caramel. It's hot, it will burn you. Okay, so obviously be careful of splashes. Don't taste it. So that's had 15 minutes and it's nicely darkened in colour. In the end, actually, that handheld thermometer, the infrared one, just couldn't cope with the temperatures, but it foams up quite a bit, and so I was actually able to use a sugar thermometer. It did get a little bit hot. It's quite tricky to control the temperature. It's gone to quite dark, but that don't really matter, does it? So all we want to do now is just let that boil subside. It's still bubbling at the minute. Just let that cool a little bit, and then, like I say, you'll need your tray lined or greased, and your 2 teaspoons of baking soda. Bicarbonate soda, sorry, baking soda. Like I say, some recipes mix that and vinegar, and you get the acid to generate the CO2, but the heat is enough to do it anyway. Now, I've not tried it in this pan. I'm hoping it's deep enough. Well, it's only a very thin layer, but even without that, when I was heating it, it was getting quite foamy. So here we go. Could have a blooper coming up. So quickly stir that in, and it's already starting to go foamy. It's going that nice golden yellow colour, definitely foaming up now. Well, you can see that, and so I think I've got that all mixed in there. So at which point we're now going to tip it out into the pan. And we now just allow that to cool. So it's cooled down now, I've taken out the tin. A little bit sticky, but I think it's going to stay like that. Paper's coming off quite easily. It's caught up in the crease here, but we can sort that. But we need to break it up. So I'm just going to try and split it, because I've got a nice big bag, a Ziploc bag, and what I'm going to do is, obviously that whole thing will fit in there, just going to put that in there and then we'll break it up. So now all I'm going to do, I mean you could just wrap it in a tea towel, it's up to you. I would suggest you do at least try to contain it a bit, because even snapping that halfway it's flying everywhere. So I've got a bit of a mixture here, so big lumps, crumbs. So the crumbs we could use in cakes and things like that. But let's nick a bit so you can see the honeycomb sort of texture. You can actually see it through it. Oh. I was going to say nice and crunchy, like you think, a little bit chewy, but it becomes more toffee-like as you chew it. It's got that sort of dark caramelly taste to it. What's that? Some hard bit. You know, another bit again. We can see that lovely sponge-like texture. So there you go. Honeycomb, honeycomb toffee, cinder toffee, okey pokey. That spongy bit was crunchy.